Holla ballers, what's going on? It's Preacher, looking at the Holy Priest for the final time before Warlords of Draenor graces our shelves. Yes, indeed. I gave this thing kind of a glowing review early in the beta, but did warn that it was overpowered. Never a great place to be, because Blizzard will whip out their shiny bats and come and hunt your ass down. It's not a great place to be at all. So Blizzard have made some changes. How have they played out, and what is the final version of this looking like? As always, some caveats with healing stuff in the beta is that we use spells that keep people alive as much as possible. The footage in the background, I did lots of dungeons on this because I enjoy this class, but this was the absolute worst one, which I think is always more interesting for healers to see how things are when things go wrong. When things are going well, healers' jobs tend to be less interesting and they tend to focus more on DPS. You'll see all kinds of crazy line of sight stuff and whatnot going on in this dungeon. Much fun was had. And in general, numbers change. Healers tend to use the spells when things aren't finished that actually keep people alive rather than what they maybe are intended to use. So early on, I mentioned that the Holy Priest has one of the biggest toolkits in the game. In fact, in terms of ability pruning, I kind of agree with the sentiment that's flying around that there is much more room to cut out some of the stuff for Holy, as there is a clear, and I mean clear, indication that although you still have these spells, Blizzard has rendered them practically useless in terms of both their mana cost and how much healing they put out, which then makes you wonder, why are they still there? Can't we do something different with them? Spells like Prayer of Healing. Prayer of Healing has little to no place in the game at the moment for either Holy or Dis, which is quite sad. And we also have Holy Word Sanctuary, which is garbage and is remaining garbage. It's been garbage for a while. Could it be that we move that spell, Prayer of Healing, into the Holy Word Sanctuary instead of having Holy Word Sanctuary? Could it be that Circle of Healing is still far too powerful? Something I tend to agree on, as we have all the other healers don't really have too much of in terms of a powerful heal that we want to keep on cooldown, but Circle of Healing is that spell for Holy. You want to use it as much as possible because it does a shitload of healing and it is pretty goddamn cheap. Way cheap. It certainly makes the Mistweavers cry a little bit how powerful it is considering its cost. Could that be moved into the AoE Sanctuary? Into AoE Chakra? Could we make Chakras far more effective? Lots of questions are being asked right now. Instead, Blizzard decides to leave people with the spells, but they're spells that you don't want to use, which is never helpful, I don't think, to new players or old ones, is to have these spells on your toolbar and they're practically pointless, and casting them would be a giant waste of time. What are the nerfs that occurred to balance things out? They were overpowered, so the nerfs were justified. Things like Renew. Renew was way too powerful. What I mentioned quite heavily in the previous look at Holy Priests is that essentially all the healers were doing in raids, where we don't use a lot of our tools, we're pressing Renew and Circle of Healing, and in fact dominating using that playstyle. They have reduced the power of Renew, but it still seems to be the go-to because everything else isn't worth casting. This problem I've just mentioned is that we have other spells available to us, but they're not very useful. Blizzard's also playing the game as they've done with other classes, which is trying to balance out various specs and make them more padded out and useful via the raid set bonuses. Prayer of Mending on its own 2 feet isn't really great, especially now it's got a cast time associated with it. What did we see when we saw the raid test set bonuses? Prayer of Mending jumps to 4 additional targets. When Prayer of Mending heals the target, you have a 20% chance to gain Serendipity. Basically, the entire 2 and 4 piece set bonuses are built around Prayer of Mending, which then makes it super good. I'm currently wearing the set bonuses, so you can... I'm obviously giving you the healing breakdown on the SCADA, so you can see where my healing is coming from. And I notice Prayer of Mending is actually very good. Without the set bonuses, Prayer of Mending is significantly weaker. I'm also using the Words of Mending level 100 talent, but we'll get to them in a moment. As gameplay-wise, Holy Priests, as always, really shine in a 5-man scenario, I think. They have so many effective ways of dealing with every single different combination of damaging and scenario, incoming damage and the scenarios they create in terms of how different the health situations are. The Holy Priests are really great, and then they can switch over to their DPS chakra and actually provide way more damage that way. Some of the problems, I think, considering transferring from Mop's version, which I also enjoy, is that chakras now seem much weaker, and that is that your Sanctuary chakra literally reduces the cooldown of Circle of Healing by 1 second. That's what that chakra does. Nothing else, nothing more. And we still maintain that Serenity, I always get these names incorrect, still refreshes the duration of Renew from your single target heals, but is no longer affected by things like Cascade and Divine Star. So a little bit of a nerf on that side, which is fine, I think. I think that's okay. I would like to see more, certainly, on the AoE chakra Sanctuary, because, honestly, reduced cooldown on Circle of Healing, great. Although most people are the sad part is, although that is obviously super boring for something we should have an actual think about which chakra we want to be in, is that Circle of Healing is so powerful, as I mentioned earlier, that, you know, people are staying in it anyway. So there you go, as we're flying out a lot of renews and stuff in raids. So what I would say, in 5-mans, you're absolutely wonderful. I have a great time in there. Healing output could be a bit higher. You'll see in this dungeon in particular, if your group's not playing particularly well, you literally cannot put out enough healing to keep them alive. In a raid scenario, though, really boring. Would like to see more effective use of other things, like Serendipity, to work with something else. As I said, Serendipity does Prayer of Healing is so useless that getting stacks of Serendipity and being able to use them just on heal is a little bit garbage in a raid environment, but such is life. Considering the state of other things, I don't think all in all it's actually that bad. I think the Holy Priest has come out of the WoD pruning process and re-evaluation of healers pretty damn well. And it's nice to see that the raw output of the Holy Priest is still staying way up there, which it should be. This is the most intense upfront healer in the game, and as such, it seems to be keeping that role. And I personally think it's pretty good. Pretty good. We still got our little niche abilities like our Leap of Faith, our Binding Heal, and our Lightwell, which is putting out tremendous healing as well. The Lightwell is very, very cool. So I'm happy with it. Guardian Spirit still feels pretty good. I wish it did reduce damage in some form, but obviously it does prevent death, so you've got the benefits there. So all in all, pretty damn good. Let's talk about these level 100 talents. In the previous video, I talked about how Saving Grace was actually going to be a big nightmare because it does so much. It was an instant cast heal that healed for a tremendous amount, but had this debuff associated with it, reducing your healing output. And a huge concern was that newer players, or maybe less experienced priests, were going to go out there with Saving Grace and start spamming it because it was an instant cast, very cheap, very powerful heal, and then end up probably causing more problems because they were going to reduce their healing to absolutely nothing. It was an ability that required thought, required a little bit of preview of what was going to happen in the rest of the fight, so you know if you can reduce your healing by a certain amount. Was it worth you casting? It was a real thinking man's spell, but it had potential to cause problems. Blizzard have indeed nerfed it on the back of that, I would assume, giving it a cast time. This kind of renders this ability, or this spell, practically useless in a lot of ways. The cast time associated with it is about the same as a flash heal. Now, it does heal for much, much more. If I check the tooltips on my current character, you've got a flash heal for 24,000 and a Saving Grace for 35,000. But it's 10,000 less, yes, which is very cool, but it does carry a 10% healing downgrade for the next 10 seconds. Wow. That's a pretty heavy cost, really, and I found myself, although I did a couple of dungeons with Saving Grace, I was using it far less than I was when it was instant cast, and I could make some nice choices based on it. And Saving Grace, for me, should be the save someone's ass spell, and it should maybe be reworded in some way that it's maybe a more intense healing deficit, but certainly will save a life. I found it way more useful when it was instant cast, and it would save people's lives. When it came down to the fact that it had the same cast time as other spells, you then have to start thinking about it. You have to start thinking, well, will a flash heal do in this situation? Have I got Serendipity stacks? Can my heal do? And when you start thinking like that, that really devalues the proposition of Saving Grace. So a little bit sad and that's gone away. Word of Mending remains the same, and obviously Word of Mending is what I'm taking because I'm rocking this 4-piece PV set bonus, which synergizes really well, making it so your Prayer of Mending is pretty godlike. It would be a little bit tough, I think, to heal some of the more poor pulls, some of the poorer pulls people do in dungeons without this bonus. Something to bear in mind is that WoD dungeons are significantly harder than they are in Mists of Pandaria, and therefore a little bit of set bonus leeway is nice to have. When it comes to clarity of purpose, I do generally believe this is just a spell that was designed for Shadow, and they've wedged it in for the healers to have. Let's give you a little read of this. Heals an ally for 5,000, increased by up to 100% based on how injured the target is. Also heals up to 5 injured allies within 10 yards of the target for the same amount. Replaces your Prayer of Healing. it just doesn't do enough. I've done some of the deep reading on it, and people seem to suggest it just needs to heal far more, and then it would be more useful. So it would literally just need to benefit either from more spell power or flat out just heal for more base, and then it would become useful. At the moment, it's one of those talents that seem pretty useless along with Saving Grace, which means you're kind of pigeonholed into Word of Mending. Blizzard seems to know that, as your set bonuses all work around Prayer of Mending. Take the hint, right? It's one of those moments where it's take the hint. Now, some of you might not be happy with the fact that your level 100 talents seem to be shoehorned in. Saving Grace was great, now isn't. Clarity of Purpose has always been a little bit on the downside, and Words of Mending obviously works so much better with the fact that Prayer of Mending gets so many buffs from elsewhere. So you have to bear in mind that maybe you don't have as much choice as you would like as a Holy Priest, but at the end of the day, they're such a solid class. I don't want anyone to go away disappointed because they're such a solid, absolutely proud class that continues to put out. And with the, obviously, downgrades towards Dis, which has been fixed, we'll be looking at this shortly, it's nice to see that the Holy Priest is viable, whereas we saw in many occasions Holy had just not become viable, except in scenarios where your overhealing wasn't going to be ignored. Holy Priest asks just the straight up, put everything on the table healer, take damage, I will heal it, and that is about it. And they do that spectacularly, absolutely spectacularly. Enjoy, guys. Holy Priest looking solid. Bye-bye.